Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. Today we're going through Psalm 102, 103, and 104. Now tomorrow we're going to jump around a little bit. It's going to be 2 Samuel chapter 5 verses 1 through 10 and also 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and chapter 12. So we're going through a couple of different things in a couple of books tomorrow. Now right off the bat, Psalm 102. The CSB calls this Affliction in Light of Eternity, but the King James Version titles this psalm The Lord's Eternal Love. Interesting. This is a prayer of a suffering person who is weak and pours out his lament before the Lord. And it starts out, verse 1, Lord, hear my prayer. I've started out a few prayers like that. I've ended a few prayers like that as well. Lord, hear my prayer. Let my cry for help come before you. Do not hide your face from me in my day of trouble. Now, the do not hide your face is a figurative expression used by the psalmist here, who thought that God had forsaken him. God's face represents the blessing of his presence. Now, I get to verse 6. There were several little things that stuck out here, but verse 6 in particular, a little owl among the ruins. This kind of denotes the psalmist's loneliness resulting from ostracism, being ostracized by people. I'm going to move on to Psalm 103. The Forgiving God is the title in the CSB, and in the King James it says, Praise for the Lord's mercy. And this is a psalm of David. Now, the threefold repetition of bless in verses 1 and 2, where you have, my soul, bless the Lord, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. My soul, bless the Lord, and do not forget all his benefits. This threefold repetition of that word is the highest form of worship. We'll read a little bit about that in Isaiah chapter 6. Now, one thing that stuck out to me here was verse 12. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Now, when I read this, the first thing I think of is I visualize someone stretching their arms as far as the east is from the west. As far as the east is from the west. And that puts you in the posture that Jesus would have been when he is hanging on the cross. And then, of course, that next line, so far has he removed our transgressions from us, because in Jesus' dying moment, that is when we were forgiven for all of our sins through his sacrifice. I found that just absolutely fascinating. Now, Psalm 104, God the Creator is the title in the CSB, and praise to the sovereign Lord for his creation and providence is the title in the King James Version. Interesting. Now, this psalm is an actual companion to Psalm 103. It begins with the exact same words that 103 ends. The psalm alludes to Noah's covenant and the 6 days of creation. The psalm is also an argument against sun worshiping. Found that kind of interesting. We get to verse 5. And while verses 1 through 4 describe the Lord's sovereignty over natural forces, the emphasis here in verse 5 shifts to the Lord as king over the earth. By divine command, God established the earth on its axis. It will never be shaken, could be translated as it will never totter. In other words, he established the earth as it sits on its axis. Not flat on a foundation, but as it sits on an axis, and it will never totter. In other words, it will never be shaken off of that axis. We get to verses 6 through 8. God covered the earth with a deep, and the water stood above the mountains. This imagery is consistent with the flood in Genesis chapter 7. Next, we get to verses 10 through 12. Right here, the psalmist transformed the destructive role of water into a constructive role. So previous to this, he'd been talking about the devastating effects of water, but here he talks about the constructive effects Basically, water for sustaining the life of his creations. And that's all I got today. That is all. So, tomorrow, let's jump into 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 10, and 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and 12. If I left something out, please put it in the comments and let's talk about it. Otherwise, click that like button and that subscribe button. And of course, click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow, for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.